Hello, and welcome to the Game Audio Hour. It's a fortnightly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas, the latest techniques, project experiences, to audio secrets. Here is where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. Welcome to, what is today? Today is episode 186! We've survived for 186 episodes. Truly a day of celebration, right? How are you doing, Mike?
And we didn't skip a single Monday in that entire time. I am doing pretty darn well, all things considered. But aside from the state of the world, things are doing pretty well around here.
Excellent. I'm really glad to hear that. Hopefully it's the same for you, Chase. Doing well?
Doing very well, thank you. Just keeping the motivation and the production and ambition process going.
That is really cool. I mean, I got to admit, I was kind of, from my particular perspective, I was feeling a little slightly envious of you guys over the last few episodes, since you two were able to have a little bit of celebration, or at least a little bit of cause for celebration with those releases that you had. Chase, you had Aground, and Mike, you had Down the Rabbit Hole very recently. And I know I've said it before, but again, congratulations to you two guys, because those are some pretty good releases there, or some pretty good music in both of those games.
Thank you. Thank you kindly.
Me, I'm just biding my time, waiting for the powers that be to release stuff, and in the meantime, just trying to keep up my chops, do some interesting stuff, do some different stuff, and it's got me thinking a little bit about some of the basics of my tool set, actually, because working in game audio, working in game music, it's good to have that nice practiced familiarity with your tools, know exactly what you're doing. But recently I was thinking about EQs, one of those really basic building blocks that we have for making any sort of sound or refining music and all that. EQ. I guess I want to, first of all, start it off with a quick question. What EQs do you use? Do you use the basic EQs that come with your DAWs, whether it be Logic or Cubase? Have you invested a little bit or a lot into EQs that come from various third parties? Maybe it's the bigger ones like Native Instruments or some of the smaller indie developers that we see strewn throughout the web. What do you two use for EQs?
Mike, you can go first.
Well, for quick and dirty basics, the Logic stock EQ is very conveniently integrated into the interface itself. There's a dedicated micro window in each track that shows you like a thumbnail of the EQ curves. So where I don't need to do anything fancy, the Logic stock EQ is just really easy to use, and it is treated favorably by Logic, as are so many of Apple's in-house offerings. As a supplementary EQ, I am very fond of the Moog EQ2 and EQ4. They both target certain frequency bands. I think the 4 is booster cut. The 2, I think, is boost only. And they both have what they refer to as the Air Band, which is a high-end shelf filter with a kind of distinct, silky, smooth sound to it. The hardware version of these plugins is very popular for pop vocals, and a little sprinkling on the master bus can add a little bit of excitement to the overall mix. So those are two things that I'm very fond of, and I've been experimenting a little bit, partly with the encouragement of all of you and Alex, with BX Digital, also from Plugin Alliance, which is another non-coloring EQ, your basic algorithm. What you see is what you get EQ, with a ton of options and a lot of interface features that make mid-side processing very easy. So I haven't decided how that's going to fit in the workflow, but I've been toying with it recently and liking it so far.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely feel you on the Mag EQ and the BX, the Brainworks stuff from Plugin Alliance. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but Chase, what about you? What are you using?
Currently, I am using the native plugin for Cubase. My mentor had told me years ago that I could get about like 75 to 80% of the way of what FabFilter Pro Q3 could do. And so I've just been kind of sticking with that. And when I can't get any further, I just drop in a good old isotope and start getting some more range and flexibility out of that. And then depending on specifically maybe what the track is needed, I may stop there, or if I need a little bit of polish, I might pull in the Mog as well, the Mog 4. But I think it's just centralized around maybe those three. I find the isotope to be the most pellucid, and I like to just kind of achieve that type of clarity if possible with the mixes with things, because the whole rule of EQ is like use it if you need it, but not use it on everything. So I try to just really be cognizant about what that is going to be on and what it's not going to be on.
Cool. Yeah, I have isotope, although I don't really have a habit of using them for my basic track-to-track EQ. I guess my habit is just to use it for on the master bus, really. But I have been messing around with it more since I did recently upgrade my isotope. So I've been pushing it a little bit, seeing if that might be something I want to use in my workflow more. But besides that, I use Reaper, and quite honestly, I don't use Reaper's stock EQs that much, and it's for a really silly reason. They just don't look very good. The UI is very functional, actually, but it doesn't look fancy. It's really too bad because it is so usable. I do like the BX EQs, both BX Digital and BX Hybrid, and they're both basically the same type of EQ, except that the modeled guts on the inside, the algorithms behind them are totally different. The interfaces are very, very similar, and they offer the same features. But the actual guts that power the EQ, one is, of course, a very clean, very clinical digital EQ, and the other one is an analog hybrid model. So different types of EQs but the interface I like, and specifically because of that interface that I enjoy using both of those Brainworks Plugin Alliance EQs. But as much as I use it, there's still problems with Brainworks. I think the one thing that I really wish it had was a feed of a frequency analysis of what's going into that plugin. You can do lots of nice, clinical, very precise edits with BX Digital, with BX Hybrid, but I really wish I could just see that frequency show up on that nice little graph that the plugin provides. Ironically, the Reaper built-in EQ does have that readout. So it's kind of annoying, and it actually made me think over the last few weeks about maybe I should get another EQ. Maybe I should get a better EQ or something. I was looking at the isotope stuff, and I kind of dismissed that a bit, mostly because of the delay that is incurred by it. You know, I do a lot of tracking of my instruments, and I want things to be working with zero latency. And the Neutron EQs are not zero latency plugins, so I just can't use it for any sort of live tracking. But I've definitely been on the lookout for what might be my next EQ. What's the cool, new, better thing that might combine a lot of the features that I see in both the plugins that I use as well as the plugins that friends use and what else is out there in the marketplace.
There's a EQ that you actually, or maybe it was Alex, mentioned that I've been looking at for the last week. And let me get the manufacturer name as well as the name of the EQ plugin is Equilibrium. So,
DMG?
DMG. Yeah. You can't say Equilibrium without EQ. And the The premise behind this one is to maximize configurability so that it has an astonishing array of configuration options for the GUI and for the underlying processing of the sound. So to start with, you can decide to use it like a kind of a mountain builder EQ where you're drawing graphs and hills and valleys on the screen and do it completely visually that way. And it's almost like sculpting clay. Or you can use it as an old-fashioned turn dials and knobs kind of EQ with the ability to type in numbers as well. You can specify all kinds of crazy things about the UI. You can say, I want fat meters, I want thin meters, I want the meters to be up here by the graphic display, I want them to be down here by the faders. It's bizarrely flexible in its configurability. And under the hood, similarly, you can pick, not only can you combine different filters next to each other, you can intermix models in a way that doesn't exist in nature. So your mid highs can be an emulated Pultec, and your lows can be a straight digital, and the other one can be API. It's just crazy how much control it gives you. For me, most of this control is pearls before swine. It's just way beyond my capacity to understand or make intelligent judgments about. But I really do like the interface flexibility. And it seems to combine the best of all worlds in that it gives you knob-based controls if you like them. And I'm someone who really does like the old-fashioned turn and knob paradigm. But it also gives you graphic display. So like BX Digital, you can see visually what's happening to the curves of your filters as you twiddle the knobs. And as you were just wishing for a few minutes ago, it will also superimpose a frequency analyzer display, which can also be configured in an astonishing number of ways, including like color and the degree of fading of the colors of the display. So you really can construct the UI that you like best with a lot of specificity. And that alone is really appealing to me. Have you played with this, either of you?
No.
I've got the demo. I played with it a bit, and honestly, it scares me. But it scares me in a similar way that Reaper kind of scared me. Yeah, Reaper is now my DAW of choice, but honestly, it took me nearly a decade to finally convince myself to use it for all of my production. I just sort of dipped my toes into the water. But when did I dip my toes into the water? I think it was right around 2011 when I did that. I started using it a little bit for sound design. But honestly, it scared me because it was such a robust platform. And it was expected, in order to use it effectively, that you are customizing the heck out of it. Oh, you could do this in terms of themes. You could do this in terms of repacks and plugins, and you're changing how your piano roll looks. You're changing how your mouse actually edits notes. You're changing so much stuff, and it's kind of expected that you do all that stuff, but in order to get to that point where you really build up a lot of facility with it, and going into Equilibrium where you could configure all these things. Like I was reading the manual and saying, oh, you could actually change the type of model that's used for the EQ in order to optimize for performance versus latency, for example. All right, so Equilibrium could be my master bus EQ, but it could also be my tracking EQ, and it could be something in the middle. And there's a little bit of paralysis analysis that is sort of incurred by just how powerful this particular program is, Equilibrium. It's amazing, honestly. It looks really cool. It seems to have just tools and features out the wazoo, and I imagine that I could really get into it, but I have to get into it. It's scary.
I don't know if you noticed, but they have a Windows-style setup wizard where they asked you some questions about what you're going to use the EQ for and what your favorite general interface paradigm is, and it builds you a configuration of the interface based on your answers.
Yeah, it does, but I'm also worried about, what if if I want to go back, yes, I can change things here and there, but it kind of goes along with that whole Reaper thing. I was really scared about going into Reaper because I wanted to know, like, hey, here is a solid model that I am going to learn and build up my facility with. What if I'm building a facility with something that ends up being the wrong thing and I want to sort of change back stuff? Oh no, I really wanted my interface to be this way. Oh, I really wanted my visualization to be this way, et cetera, et cetera. And it kind of scares me from making those first steps into it.
It does seem to occupy the other extreme of the configurability spectrum as some of the console strip emulations we've been talking about recently, where you can get a emulation of an SSL or a Neve, and then you've just got 4 knobs and a couple of buttons, and you've got to do the best you can with a very inflexible set of controls. And the advantage to those paradigms is simplicity and the opposite of what you're describing, where you feel weighed down by the abyss of freedom. I guess you can't be weighed down by an abyss. I just mixed metaphors. But anyway, you can feel paralyzed because there are too many decisions to make. And even if you don't have to make those decisions, the ability to make those decisions can kind of haunt you. You know, in the back of your head, like, oh, should I be using that particular emulation or should I be using that? Whereas if you're, channeling the, no pun intended, spirit of our forefathers who just had a physical hardware console strip and had 3 knobs and they had to do the best they could, you do have to, by necessity, get through the process more quickly.
Yeah, I got to admit, Equilibrium, for as interesting and as cool as it is, I've been thinking about rather diving into something that a lot of other people use, because I know a lot of other people use it and they use it in the same way. They deal with the same interface. Fab filter is really the thing. Alex mentioned that before the show. Too bad Alex can't be here right now to espouse one way or the other. But, Fab Filter is one of these things that I'm thinking about diving into as, a big, deep, powerful EQ that I could go into, but without the fear of perhaps misconfiguring it. I don't have that paralysis analysis that will bother me when I dive into it. I just know, if I learn this program, I basically learning it the same way that every other person that has acquired this program has done so.
Last show we were talking about some of the dangers of indie developers and relying on the plugins or creations of companies that might not be around to support what they've done. And following that logic, there is also an advantage to plugins by like FabFilter or the DAW stock plugins or something like the EQ of Ozone, which is by Isotope, as opposed to very specialized labor of love EQs, and I get the impression, I could be absolutely wrong, but I get the impression that Equilibrium is kind of a boutique product spearheaded by one particularly talented and experienced individual. So there is also the fear of what happens if that individual decides to join a monastery, or become a consultant for some other company. Is that skill set transferable to whoever might take over the product? Whereas something like Isotope's going to be around forever, Brainworks will be around forever, Logic will continue to move forward, and the stock plugins. And so there is a kind of security in a big institutional plugin. And for something like EQ, where we rely on what we're doing all the time, there's an argument for cowardice against the boutique approach.
Mm-hmm. Chase, are you interested or excited by anything that we've been talking about here? Or is there like something else that is perhaps on your mind that comes to mind when you think about, EQ? I wonder if I can up my game in a particular way.
Honestly, between you two talking about it, I feel as if I don't know enough. So I'm just mostly like listening. But the one thing that between your discussion that was on my mind was, how does it apply to game audio in the terms of relevancy for now? And right now I'm on a mobile project and I have to deal with a certain frequency spectrum that only comes out through this tiny little speaker that we have as our mobile device. And I've been doing a lot of research in terms of what comes through properly and what doesn't. And then I've been thinking about EQ matching, which is possibly taking other projects that were successful and having that, and how I can use an EQ to basically achieve what the others have done to kind of get close to that, so that the product that I'm producing is at that professional standard. And so between like I said, just your discussion earlier, that's where my mind was in thinking like, oh, will it be equilibrium of that? I know that most of our industry colleagues and friends use nothing but fab filter. It's nothing but praises and such. But I'm wondering if maybe equilibrium, or if maybe a Neve approach from Plugin Alliance will be able to give more range and process to the actual craft that goes into it if you were trying to ship on a mobile title.
Yeah, mobile is tough. I think one thing that actually scares me about mobile is that the phones are changing so much, and even with that, between the phones, things are changing a lot. So, I mean, iPhone. I know most mobile developers are going to target iPhone as their main platform. You target iPhone, and you know that things are going to work fine because it's more or less an understood platform, and Apple developer support there is this very nice, singular, monolithic thing that you can trust in, as opposed to, say, the Android world. But even then, the new iPhone SE is a different beast than the iPhone 8, than the iPhone 7, than the iPhone 6. I remember when I was working in basically this production mix mode on Sky a few years back, we were just ripping our hair out because the iPhone 7 and iPhone 8, even though they looked and felt very similar, they sounded so different, and that caused some weird things with some mix decisions that we had for some of our sound design. And we were trying to figure out, what the heck do we do with this? How do we handle this? Do we mix for an in-between? Do we mix for these things individually? And it wasn't just a matter of it sounding subtly weird. Because the iPhone is this thing that needs to make stuff in that mid-voice appropriate range sound good, it was making some weird, really weird stuff happen in our sound design. And in the end, we decided, okay, we're going to have to try to mix for these things individually and make very specific exceptions throughout the dynamic mixing that was happening in the game. So mobile scares the heck out of me, honestly. It really does.
In both your respective projects, when you were mixing for mobile platforms, were you specifically targeting the speaker output, or were you thinking about the earbud experience or headphone experience?
Well, for me, we definitely had a totally separate mix for the headphones. Obviously, headphone output's going to be different from phone to phone, but it's not going to differ that much. Usually the difference is going to be just a matter of volume and output power, and the actual response is not going to be that different. We were definitely thinking about the speakers, and those speakers could vary quite wildly. iPhone 7, I mentioned that because that's kind of a weird outlier where the physical dimensions of the phone did not really change. It's very similar to the iPhone 6, and it's very similar to the iPhone 8. But for some reason, the sound of an iPhone 7 is weird compared to both of them. And now we're doing some new things here. The iPhone 10, the 10R, 11, they're a little bit more consistent now. But now Apple is doing even weirder things with their big iPads. It used to be the big iPad was a 9.7 inch. Now the big iPad is a 12 point something inch. And the speaker design on the inside has actually changed quite a bit too. So, yeah, it just scares me. It's just scary.
Wouldn't it make sense for the manufacturers of mobile electronics to provide the EQ filter equivalent of device drivers, where they'll say, send us the audio as you want it, and we will do some EQ adjustments to compensate for the resonances and the deficiencies of the speaker. And so you guys don't have to worry about any of that.
Whew.
That would be nice.
That would be really nice. That'd be great. Like if Apple was doing something like that, that would be fantastic. Honestly, I can't imagine anyone but an Apple or a really big company like a Samsung yeah, HTC maybe, those really big companies providing that. But man, that would be great. That would be so great.
It seems like it'd be very easy for them to do, and it would avoid reinventing the wheel, as every single developer had to solve the exact same problem with varying degrees of precision. So, Apple, if you're listening, this is an official Game Audio Hour feature request.
Yes, let's do it. Come on. All right. Yep. EQ is fun. And it's definitely something we have to deal with, both with our sound design and in the runtime, especially for these mobile devices. It's scary. You were mentioning those Chase, you were mentioning is there something specifically that you're doing for fingerprint EQ? Do you use a fingerprint EQ plugin, or are you just trying to match it by ear when you're talking about like reference mixes?
Yeah, aside from that, I was using just my ears, but I had been put on to, well, we know that Isotope has like that matching feature, and then along with Metric AB, but then Will Roger, was talking about that newfangled audio match, and that had reminded me that there was like again another option to kind of doing some things and experimenting. And so I think I might end up picking that up fairly soon to kind of just fiddle around and see if I can actually make my idea come into fruition of some sort that I'm trying to achieve with this project.
Oh man, I'm actually looking for that right now. Do you remember what Audio Match is? Who makes that?
The one that I just mentioned?
Yeah,
Yeah, Newfangled Audio, I believe.
Newfangled. Newfangled Audio. Oh, wait a minute. Is this Equivocate? Is that what it is?
Yes, Equivocate. Yes,
All right.
that's the one.
So I'm going to pop this here. And I'm kind of interested. Oh, Eventude. I'm kind of interested in this. On the YouTube stream, I'm just been putting a couple of web links in the quadrant so you can see what we're looking at. I'm kind of interested in this. I've been messing around with a couple of different fingerprint EQs, especially when they go on sale, honestly. When they're on sale, when they're cheap. I remember getting a fingerprint EQ, or rather it's a dynamic EQ from Plugin Alliance that has a fingerprinting functionality there, except it's tied to a dynamic EQ rather than a standard static linear EQ.
Yeah.
And that was kind of fun. I've been having fun messing with those, but it's pretty rare that I actually use it for something, mostly because I'm still, I don't know. It's just a whole different tool that I feel a little bit worried about, because there's a little bit of black box processing that tends to happen before it spits out the EQ that it's going to give you, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely something to be experimented with along and appropriated with, depending on the context of the project and such.
Yeah. This provides an opportunity for a segue into a question I wanted to ask you guys. But how do you feel about EQs that are more like black boxes, that are not very tweakable, that don't really show you a lot of what's going on under the hood? Are there any that you like or that you've looked at and are interested in?
Well, we both mentioned the Mog Audio emulations, and that's kind of an EQ with a point of view. You know, has a very specific sound, does a few things in a very particular way. So I guess when you've got an EQ that's emulating particular hardware that does something in a nonlinear fashion, there's an element of that black box quality that you mentioned. Now, if you're talking more about psychoacoustic modeling and really complicated real-time chugging along, I don't know that I've the closest I could think of is something I've been playing with recently called Track Spacer, which is a device that automates something that we do normally ourselves. You take a side chain input of something else, and the Track Spacer applies a dynamic EQ so that it drops the frequencies being used by that other thing in real time. So much as we might notch out like 90 hertz out of our bass to leave room for the kick drum, Track Spacer does that kind of complementary EQ curve stuff on the fly dynamically. So it listens to the kick drum and it'll carve out space in the bass track depending on what frequencies the kick drum is using. So that's something we do all the time, right? We might do it in a static kind of way. We might just say, okay, generally this lives here, so we'll carve out that of something else. But this does it in real time so that when your kick drum is not kicking along, your bass reclaims the spectral territory that was temporarily carved away to leave room for the bass drum. So that, I don't know if that's exactly what you were talking about, but it's definitely kind of a brainiac AI under the hood. You don't get to mess with it. It's going to do what it pleases, and hopefully you like the result kind of thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking about. I mean, like you said, we can do the thing of side chaining, bass drum, stuff like that. It was like, okay, that's cool. And certainly it's a thing we can do with existing tools, especially, I don't know, whenever VST3 came around and suddenly side chaining became this thing that you just do all the time, right? But I'm looking specifically at Track Spacer, and that user interface, there's really not much to it, is there? It's just a thing that says amount 0 to 100 and it just works, which is, yeah, that sort of thing is what I'm thinking about, where it's kind of like, oh, you're just doing it. You want more of this? You want less of it? Okay, we'll do it. It's a little scary to me.
There are a couple of ways you can tweak the interface is, first of all, as you said, very simple, very monolithic. There are a few little refinements. You can basically specify the range of the frequency spectrum that you want it to apply to. And there's a little bit of a preferences panel hidden away where you can do a little, I said the word little like 5 times in the last 10 seconds, where you can do additional refinement of the response. But by and large, yes, it's kind of a one knob solution. But try it out, because on first blush, I was impressed. It seems to really do its thing very well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Chase, is there anything that you're particularly using that's more like a black box rather than a tweakable type of plugin that shows you what it's doing?
I wonder, I'm trying to think of like the chain of such. I guess maybe that HG2, I would say, or the fill cascade. The fill cascade actually is definitely more black box oriented, as well as the HG2. But the fill cascade, I've been really getting my fingers wet with that a little bit more since I bought it. Figured, buy it and use it, and then don't let it like go to waste. But I've been getting a little bit better at it, and you definitely got to use your ears, which is something that I feel I lack in experience, to kind of catch up with the times and such, especially with going through a different monitor change. And so it really pushes my ear training to another level by using those type of plugins. But other than that, it's been a semi-decent experience. It's just me. It's the user, not the plugin
Mm-hmm.
in that regard. But yeah, I think that's the only thing that comes to mind currently.
Yeah.
For the benefit of those listening, Phil's Cascade is this eccentric plugin offered by, I don't know if it's Brainworks, but it's definitely somebody under the Plugin Alliance umbrella. And the idea is that somebody, presumably Phil, built this complicated analog tube amp contraption with lots of knobs and old-timey voltage things just for the purpose, not for use in the real world. They just built one of these things, and it was just going to be the basis of a plug-in emulation. And then I think they took a sledgehammer to the actual device. So it lives on Matrix style, only in the form of this plug-in Ghost. And it's got just bizarre series of it's totally incomprehensible to me, honestly. It's someone like Kyle could understand it, but it applies many of the effects that we look for in tube circuitry, I guess. A warming of the sound, a kind of flavoring of the timbre. It's just hard to understand for me. Chase, have you gotten any practical effects out of it?
Yeah, I actually used it on a voiceover demo, which gave it a lot of clarity. My old mentor had put me onto it, and he said, you need this. And I said, okay. And I looked at the price, and I said, no, I don't need that. And then when I got the discount, I said, okay, I'll get this. And so it's interesting you mentioned that. I used to work at a hi-fi audio company, actually here in Moore Park where I live. some years ago, and they dealt with circuitry and tube amps and such like that. So I've got some familiarity with understanding that type of process, and my ears know what it's supposed to be like. But in the virtual form, it's a little bit difficult to make that translation. And so that's why I was saying, like, I'm learning the process of what it can do well and what not to use it on. So I used it for a voiceover demo. I know that it clears up. It seems to be more of like a mastering part of it, the side of it, rather than like a in mix part of side of it. You can, but it's good for like maybe like guitar stuff and some vocals and other things like that. It's actually not terribly hard to use, especially if you're ear oriented like I am from just listening all the time. And you can get some good results out of it fairly easily if you just know exactly what to use it on.
How would you compare it to the HG2, which for our listeners is another tube emulator plugin that we talk about frequently on this show?
I would say it's incomparable. I'd say that those two plugins are definitely, in their own regard, separate uses for what they need to be used for. And what I mean by that is, so I guess you need two instances, I guess, for the HG2 to kind of actually model the stereo effect of what it's supposed to do properly. Whereas with the Field Cascade, it was not told or have not found in my research or experimentation to use that. And it's a definitely different character of sound completely, probably specifically because of, well, if you're using tubes, different tubes have different voltages and amps and things like that, and that characterizes the sound quite differently, especially if you have a tube that's like worth $500 versus a tube that's like $15. And so if they're modeling those tubes based off of a tube that's like $500 for a warm analog sound versus like a grit or a dry analog sound with working with resistors and such in the real world of circuitry, then I would say the HG2 is going to give you this more like upper clarity thing, but the Field Cascade is more of a timbre character that's not going to necessarily brighten, but just more smooth out the audio and the project that you're working with.
Ooh, yeah, I think that makes sense. I don't have Field Cascade, partly because it just looks so weird. I mean, HG2.
You two are funny about this whole GUI thing.
Well, I mean, I mean, not in terms of like how it looks, but like HG2, it makes sense to me. It's like, oh, you're pentode. I'm gonna drive the pentode up, and you know, it's not like I'm a master audio engineer or electrical engineer. I get that. I'm going to increase the drive there, and then I'm going to maybe decrease the output or something like that. And it's very clear what's going on. Versus on Field Cascade, it has like a resonance knob that's labeled A through I. Like, I mean, huh? You know, what does it mean? Filter A through I. You know, and what is the difference between filter D versus filter C? It's like that. Like, I mean, I guess if it sounds good, it sounds good. But again, it scares me from going into that. For a totally different reason than stuff like equilibrium and whatnot.
I understand your resistance in that. I guess from playing around with it, I've already made the translation of what those knobs mean. So I know it's like a low pass filter versus like a high pass filter or something. So they could have just labeled that way, but they didn't. And so that's all it is. That's really all it is.
Wow. Okay.
There's an analogous phenomenon, no pun intended, see if you can follow me with this comparison. You know, sometimes you get percussion libraries and they give you these amazing menus where every key on the keyboard is mapped to a different percussion instrument. And it's because a lot of these don't have pitches, so you don't need to have an octave devoted to your shaker. I find it kind of maddening when there isn't an explication of exactly what physical object each key corresponds to. If I'm just hearing timbre after timbre after timbre, it becomes a little disorienting. And I feel like I need the visual, even if it's a graphic in the interface, to show me what physical object I'm dealing with. Otherwise, it takes more effort for me to understand what I'm listening to. And yes, in theory, our ears are the ultimate judge, but human beings can't really retain raw sense data that way. So if I see a picture of a timbale, it's a very efficient way for me to interpret what I'm hearing. So getting back to Phil's Cascade, again, grid I through grid D, those are just abstract labels that have no physical referent. So I too agreeing with Vince, would appreciate some kind of correlation of these timbres rather than just having to memorize this kind of sound associates with this dial in this physical position.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I think we've done enough with this EQ and plugin stuff for at least for this episode. Maybe we'll return to it because Alex will come at us and say, "No, what were you talking about on episode 186? I have my own opinions." But maybe so we'll leave it for that. Let's let Alex chime in at a later episode. Mike, there was actually something that you wanted to talk about when it came to handling articulations.
File this under very specific tricks and tips. This is something I discovered for myself, and it's an interesting technique that I think is just useful in a very specific set of circumstances. So I thought I'd share it with everybody. Disclaimer, it's not original. I'm probably not the first person to come up with this. It's not brilliant. A lot of what I say is brilliant. This is not. But without further disclaimer, imagine you are writing harmonies or chordal passages with an instrument that is normally subdivided into sections. So you've got a choir, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. You're working with strings, you have violin 1, 2, viola, cello, etc. Some scenario like that, brass, winds, whatever. Now, often, in the name of expedience, we turn to these ensemble patches, which will combine all of the subgroups into one convenient keyboard layout. And typically, there'll be some decisions as to when you're transitioning from one instrument to the other. So maybe flute is octave up here, and then right below there you get some oboe, and below there you get some clarinet. And depending where your fingers fall on the keyboard, you get some intermixture of these different instruments. So this is just prelude. We all do this. Ensemble patches are handy. They let you audition an idea very quickly, as opposed to sketching out the voice leading for every subgroup of your instrument. Now, I find that sometimes I can actually go with ensemble patches for the final product under some circumstances where I don't need to refine it and decide which notes that my fingers hit go to the flutes and which go to the oboes and et cetera. And how do you two feel about that subject, first of all?
Well, that's scary to me, honestly. I'm not sure if I could ever let an ensemble string patch just sit there. I feel like I need to explode it out, duplicate tracks, be like, okay, now these are my violin 1s, violin 2s, etc. Yeah, I don't think I could. It would bug me if I were to do that, honestly.
Chase, do you have an opinion?
Yeah, I'm probably with Vince in terms of at least having something else going along with it, because it would just stand out. And I guess we're always trying to achieve realism in these mock-ups of sorts, right? So the ensemble patch is usually not going to be enough to cut it.
Yeah, I think it would be different if I could mentally just convince myself this isn't strings, it's a string patch or it's a string pad. And that's what I'm doing there. But usually I'm not thinking that, or, if I'm starting with, I'm in an orchestral idiom, I would want to retain that. I would want to go back to, okay, I need to actually expound on what my strings are doing on a section-by-section basis.
Right. Well, these are the answers I was hoping you'd give, because it justifies my tip. So if you want to make that transition from an ensemble patch to individual sub-choirs within the instrumental family in which you're working, there is usually some kind of process of splitting apart the voices. What I used to do is I would create individual tracks for violin 1, violin 2, viola, etc. And then I would maybe copy the original sequence to each of those, and I delete everything that didn't belong until finally I would be left with each voice on its own track. Or alternatively, I might convert the chordal writing into notation and then hand play in each line to give it more of a feeling of musicianship. And we all know the benefits of this approach, because you might have legato articulations, which are now possible when you have a monophonic voice, and you can't take advantage of that when you're working with ensemble patches. And to flip it around the other way, a danger of the ensemble patch is that if you have an inner voice that crosses the threshold that patch has decided belongs to one group or the other, you've got, I'll visualize this for you, you've got like an ascending melody line, and it crosses some threshold, and suddenly that melody line jumps from violas to violins too, because that's where the ensemble patch decided that border arbitrarily was going to be. So your melody might move in the stereo field. So all kinds of good reasons not to do the ensemble patch as the final product. But it is a little bit of a pain to do that extraction process where you're painstakingly moving a voice to this track and then looking at this massive group of notes that you originally improvised on your keyboard.
Yep.
And what happens if you want to revoice it? It's like refactoring code. It can be very messy because then maybe you have to somehow elegantly move some of the notes, but not all, from one track to another. So wouldn't it be nice if there were a better way to do this process? And the technique that I stumbled upon for myself is, imagine, if you will, a contact or equivalent multi-timbral plugin, and you've got a contact multi, and you've got your ensemble patch, MIDI channel 1, you've got violins, MIDI channel 2, and so on. So you've got all the tools you need in one contact multi. Now you turn to your favorite articulation paradigm. For me, it's the articulation management system of Logic, and for other users, it might be Steinberg's expression maps, right? You create, I'm going to use the terms that are appropriate for Logic, but you can easily translate this to any other articulation system, or indeed just raw MIDI channels. But I create an articulation for each member of the string choir, running with our string example. So instead of an articulation being for a particular playing technique within ensemble, I will actually make the articulation refer to one member of the choir. So violins 1 will be an articulation, violins 2 would be another, violins 3, violas, cello, etc. And then looking at my original ensemble writing with that ensemble patch, I'll simply highlight the notes I want to be, for example, violin 1, and then set that to the articulation of violin 1, and so on for all the other notes. So you essentially only working with one big batch of MIDI data on one track, but you individually route the lines to the particular instrumental group you want by using articulation system. That was a lot of words. Did that make sense? Can you get a visual of that?
That makes a lot of sense, honestly. That's really cool. That is definitely a cool way to think about it. That probably means I would have to, because right now I do have an orchestral template where I do have basically individual contact instances for violins 1, violin 2, violas, etc. But I guess instead I would have like a single contact multi that's going to have MIDI channels, and throw all of my ensemble data onto that, and then set up articulations, like you said, on the notes instead. That makes a lot of sense to me, and that's actually kind of cool.
Another advantage of this system, well, there are two other advantages that I'll point out. In Logic, you can have note color when you're looking at your matrix editor display, piano roll, I forget what they call it these days. You can have note color correspond to articulation. The choices of color are not open to you, but you basically, articulation 1, whatever that is, may be purple, articulation 2 may be orange. So you can visually see at a glance which notes correspond to which articulation, and therefore, in this case, to which instrumental subgroup. So you can quickly see, oh, did I accidentally give 2 notes, an interval to the second violins? And you can see what's assigned where. Advantage 2 is great ease of making a change. So we mentioned earlier, if we've got one track for each instrumental subgroup, if you wanted to move a note from violins 2 to violas, you have to kind of copy and then paste, and then you're jumping back and forth between different tracks. Here, you just pick a note, and then using a pop-up contextual menu, change the articulation, and bang, it's now part of a different ensemble. You could even go crazier if you wanted to defer the decision as to which string library you were using, because there's no reason that contact couldn't contain violins 1, for example, from 4 different libraries, assuming they were all contact compatible, and you could have an articulation for Spitfire violin 1 legato, East-West violin 1 legato, and you could then just on the fly reassign those notes to not only different subgroups, but different manufacturers. Articulations ultimately can be arbitrary designations to any sound, and in this particular use, there's a kind of ergonomic benefit and a quickness of editing that I found to be extremely useful, and it spares me a lot of the headaches of this painful extraction and reassignment to subvoices procedure. So this is my gift to all of you who have struggled with the same issue and feel like trying out this method, because I'm doing it increasingly, and it's saving me a lot of time, and it's making me less lazy when I'm writing for chordal passages like this, and doing that detail work and assigning individual lines to particular instrumental subgroups.
That's cool. How does this feel for you, Chase? Does this seem like it would make sense for you with Cubase expression maps?
This is one of those like stress laughs that I just did. So funny. This is my answer. I know about expression maps. I've actually known about them for a long time because plug again for my old mentor. That's actually how it all started when we were. It was years ago at the gang barbecue, and the first thing he says to me was like, "Have you been an assistant to a composer before?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have." He's like, "Do you know about expression maps?" And that was the first time I heard about this several years ago, and I was like, "No." And that was what I started doing. And so as Mike is talking, I'm like, oh, this sounds like expression maps. And so all of these memories are like flooding back. And it's small PTSD, just very tiny, because I had to program everything you just explained for him, exactly of the advantages you just named, everything like that. But you want to know the funny thing about this is I don't remember anything. So I never got to use it. So that's why I'm like, oh, this is terrible. It's all coming back to me. And every once in a while, I'll think about the expression maps. I'm like, I don't understand it. I did it, but I don't understand it. Why did I do all that work? And I don't know. I'm not making the connection yet. Even though with you explaining it, I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand the workflow for me necessarily yet. Let alone how to program it again. It's been years. I have all my notes. I need to dig them up. I'm sure I was scrambling and off way home in the phone saying this is what you had to do when you had to learn it on the fly because you're under pressure. So yes, that is my story.
I apologize for traumatizing you.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
I don't know. Maybe you should get back into it. Well, I mean, even though I'm not a Logic or Cubase person, I use Reaper, but I do use articulation management in the form of the Reticulate plugin, and that's cool. It's definitely very helpful. But even beyond that, just having to deal with that really messy extraction process is a thing, right? It's just even if I'm actually thinking about that. I'm anticipating that as I'm playing in stuff. Okay, I know I'm doing like very clean 3-voice, 4-voice harmony stuff here, and it's already affecting me. Anticipating how painful it's going to be, and it's not necessarily that painful, but it is a lot of time that it's going to. If I'm going to be going as fast as humanly possible, it's still going to take a long time just being like, okay, I've got to retrack this basically. Effectively, I'm retracking this on these different channels because there's no easy extraction process. So like just that idea of no, put the articulations on the notes, in that MIDI in that glob of MIDI data that you got is honestly kind of a little revelation. So thank you for that, Mike.
No, it's very gratifying. This weird little thing might be useful to another human being other than me.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have some fun messing with that and thinking about that for whatever my next big project with strings is right now. I got to admit, right now I'm doing a lot of more electronic, hard rocking type music. But I'm looking forward to messing around with that a little bit. Maybe it's for a personal project down the line.
Yeah, I think I should embrace it again, and I've grown quite a bit since that time. So I think I'm a little bit more mature to deal with it now. It's one of those seed plants that just needed to kind of grow a little bud.
I think ultimately, what we want is that the mechanics of entering music into our DAW, or however we're composing, we want the mechanics to limit our imagination as little as possible. So realistically, if doing something is a pain, we're less likely to do it. And that's always been true. I mean, music technology always drives aesthetics, but we want to decrease the drag and the friction of our interfaces whenever we can, so that when we're coming up with a musical idea, we don't flinch because we know that there's extra work just because of the way the interface of our DAW works or how MIDI processing goes. So the more transparent we can make these tools, the more freedom we'll feel in artistic exploration, and the less we'll feel weighed down by what's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hear, hear. All right. We have just a few minutes left in our game audio hour. So we should talk a little bit about what we're doing on the side for fun. Maybe it's a game. Maybe we're playing some games. Maybe we're listening to some music, something cool. Mike, are you consuming anything interesting lately?
I've made no secret of my love for the music of Jeremy Soule, and in particular his work on the Elder Scrolls series. And having listened to Skyrim and Oblivion's game soundtracks enough that I almost feel deja vu every time I play any of them, I thought, why don't I go back in time and try to listen to some of those older soundtracks? So I was listening to the Morrowind score, which I think was a recent release. Maybe he dug through his archives and put together that in the last few years. It's clearly sampled and yet surprisingly good. The samples, and this is like, I guess, 2013, so it's maybe even earlier than that.
It's earlier.
Working. It's got to be earlier, right? Because Skyrim was 2011, so I guess it's like the aughts.
It's Morrowind, and then it was after that, the rest of them. But even before that, it was before Morrowind, there was another one.
Oh, God.
So I think it's like the
Morrowind
third
was 2002?
Yeah.
Wow.
Jeez.
So I was way off. So for something, I don't know if he went and re-rendered any of these with more modern tracks. They do sound like they're the most sophisticated thing in 2003. But the writing is so good, and the use of the tracks kind of elegantly gets what you can out of samples that just you're able to enjoy it as music without being too weighed down by your knowledge of how it was produced. And if you're a big fan of these scores like I am, it's like really liking the musical Rent and then going back and listening to Tick, Tick, Boom. It's like an earlier thing by the same guy, more of the same, a little less sophisticated, but a real joy to listen to. So that's been a retro score that I've been really liking.
Ooh, nice. It's always good to look back at stuff. I mean, Chase, you do that a lot with games. You've been playing some PS2 Castlevania, but what else are you consuming right now?
Yeah, beat that, thankfully, and went through the mode. And so that was the first game beat of the year. And shout out to Yamane Michiru for an awesome soundtrack for that, which I'll probably do a subscription for. But I got to play, my friend bought me Streets of Rage 4. I'm checking out some of Koshiro-san's like pieces of work. And ironically found out through Twitter that Olivier Delivrier was mainly, I guess, mostly in charge of that soundtrack. So just been playing some Streets of Rage 4 and then enjoying some Last Kingdom music as well, which is a very good show on Netflix that I've thoroughly enjoyed. It got my girlfriend hooked up to after she begrudgingly fought me on it and fell asleep through the first season of a couple episodes. But now she's just like, Last Kingdom, Last Kingdom, Last Kingdom. And I'm like, yeah, Last Kingdom.
Oh, man.
So that's the total consumption thus far.
That is cool. Man, what am I consuming right now? It's weird. I am mostly dealing with Tetris because I basically decided I am going to do a very specific. I have a very specific goal for myself on the Tetris effect on PlayStation 4. I want to hit top 100 in combos mode. So, combos mode is this fun mode where every single drop you make has to create a clear of some sort. So it's just like a rapid fire successive well puzzles where you just have to make drop. And in order to clear these things, that means you have to do like 13, 14, 15 in a row without a drop not resulting in a clear. And you have to do these really fast where you're averaging maybe 2 drops a second at the very high end. I just decided I'm pretty good at Tetris. I'm not going to be the very best. I'm not going to be number one in the world. There are basically like 20 people in Japan that probably can lay claim to that. But I want to be at top 100. And I've been pushing myself over the last few weeks. And right now I'm somewhere around 130 or so. So I'm like pretty high up there. I'm actually really quite good. I'm just not at that super elite top echelon that that really reigns over both Tetris Effect and Tetris 99, the battle royale Tetris that is pretty popular on Switch. But one of these days, I'm gonna slowly inch my way up there and become one of those elites at Tetris.
Just to clarify, you are the 130th ranked Tetris player in the world?
Well, specifically in combo mode, which is really the most important mode when you're dealing with how to play against other players in Tetris 99. Because, classic Tetris, your singles, doubles, triples Tetris, right? But in order to play competitively with modern rules, you build up attacks on other players by making successive clear drops without breaking a chain. And in that particular mode of Tetris Effect, I'm in the 130s.
So this is like the Texas Hold'em of Tetris. It's like the one mode of playing where it's accepted as the standard for competitive gameplay.
Correct. Yeah. So I'm
Wow.
Go Vince.
I'm pretty good.
Go Vince.
I'm pretty good. I mean, there are some games where I was actually like really, really high up there. There was a football game that came out back in the late 2000s called Backbreaker. And at one point, I was number 3 on Xbox Live in that game. I mean, I was just, I was
Breaking
really
backs.
up there. I was good.
Breaking back.
Oh man. But yeah, that's my goal for right now. I'm gonna really push my Tetris skill to the limit.
I love how each episode we're learning something previously undisclosed about one host. Like we learned that Chase is part of a voiceover dynasty, and now we're learning that you're like an Olympic level Tetris player. This is really cool. Let's see what kind of secrets Alex has for us next week.
Oh man! So Alex, if you're listening, prepare yourself. We're gonna really grill you. You're gonna give us something cool. All right. Well, it's been a great hour, so we should probably call it an episode. Thank you to everyone that is watching and listening to us. This was Game Audio Hour episode 186. If you like us, you can follow us on Twitter. You can like us on Facebook. And of course, we're going to be back during Monday, 2 weeks from now, answering questions in chat if you're around, and we'll have a fun program for you then. So until then, bye.